I saw myself sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle in March 2023. Not someone who looked like me, not a resemblance. Me, exactly me. I was meeting a friend for lunch and arrived early. The coffee shop was across the street from the restaurant, so I decided to grab a drink while I waited. As I approached the entrance, I glanced through the window. There I was, sitting at a corner table. Same haircut I'd gotten 2 days before. Same green jacket I was wearing at that exact moment. Same silver bracelet on my left wrist that my sister had given me for my birthday. I stopped walking. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The person at the table had their back partially to the window, but I could see enough. The profile was mine. The posture was mine. Everything was identical. I stood on the sidewalk, staring for maybe 30 seconds. The figure didn't move, just sat there with a coffee cup in front of them, looking down at something I couldn't see. A phone maybe, or a book. A woman bumped into me from behind, apologized, and moved past. The brief contact snapped me out of my frozen state. I decided to go inside. I needed to see this up close. Understand what I was looking at. I pushed open the door. The bell above chimed. I looked toward the corner table. It was empty. The chair was pushed in. No coffee cup. No person. Nothing. I walked over to the table anyway. There was no warmth on the chair when I touched it. No condensation ring from a cup on the table. No sign anyone had been sitting there recently. The barista called out, asking if I wanted to order. I turned to her and asked if she'd seen someone sitting at this table a minute ago. She looked confused and said the table had been empty since she started her shift an hour ago. I ordered a coffee I didn't want and sat at a different table. I kept glancing at that empty corner spot. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend, saying I was running late, that something weird had happened. While I waited for her response, I thought about what I'd seen. Maybe it was stress. I'd been working long hours. Maybe I'd imagined it, but the details were so specific. The haircut, the jacket, the bracelet. Those weren't things my mind would randomly generate with such accuracy. My friend texted back saying no problem. She was running late too. I sat there drinking coffee and trying to rationalize what I'd seen through that window. Then I noticed the barista was looking at me strangely. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away and busied herself with cleaning the espresso machine. Something about her reaction bothered me. I finished my coffee and left. Met my friend for lunch. I didn't mention what had happened. It sounded insane even in my own head. But over the next week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Small things seemed wrong. I'd find items in my apartment move slightly. My keys would be in a different pocket than where I'd left them. My car would be parked, facing a different direction than I remembered. I started wondering if I was experiencing some kind of memory issue. Early onset dementia maybe, though I was only 28. I made an appointment with my doctor. Before the appointment, something else happened. I was at the grocery store near my apartment. I was in the produce section, selecting apples, when I heard someone call my name. I turned around. A woman I didn't recognize was waving at me from across the aisle. She walked over with a big smile and started talking about how good it was to see me. How long had it been? She'd been meaning to call. I had no idea who she was. I told her I thought she had me confused with someone else. Her smile faltered. She insisted we'd met at her birthday party 3 months ago. She described the party in detail. The restaurant, the people who were there, conversations we'd supposedly had. I'd never been to that restaurant, never met any of the people she mentioned. I apologized and said she definitely had me confused with someone else. She looked hurt and confused, but eventually walked away. That interaction stayed with me. This woman was absolutely certain she knew me. She'd described specific interactions, specific conversations. She wasn't mistaken about a vague resemblance. She believed she knew me personally. 2 days later, I was leaving my apartment building when my neighbor stopped me in the lobby. He mentioned he'd seen me leaving earlier that morning around 6. He'd wanted to ask about borrowing my toolkit, but I'd been in a hurry. I told him I hadn't left the building until just now, almost 9 o'clock. He insisted he'd seen me. Same clothes I was wearing now, actually. Same everything. He'd called out to me, but I'd kept walking like I hadn't heard. I felt a chill run through me. I asked him to describe exactly what he'd seen. He described me in perfect detail, down to the sneakers I was wearing. He said I'd gotten into my car and driven away. I told him that wasn't possible. I'd been asleep until 7:30. He looked at me like I was lying or crazy. He said he knew what he saw. Then he walked away, looking uncomfortable. I went to my car, sat in the driver's seat, trying to think. My neighbor had seen someone who looked exactly like me, wearing my exact clothes, driving my car, but I'd been asleep in my apartment. I checked my car for signs of someone else having driven it. The seat position was different than how I usually kept it. The rear view mirror was adjusted slightly off. Little details that I might have missed if I wasn't looking carefully. Someone had been in my car, someone who looked like me. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake thinking about the figure in the coffee shop, the woman at the grocery store, my neighbor's sighting. I set up a cheap security camera in my living room, angled toward my front door. 3 nights later, I reviewed the footage. At 4 in the morning, my front door opened. I watched myself walk into my apartment. Same pajamas I'd been wearing. Same everything. The figure moved through my living room, disappeared into my bedroom for a few minutes, then left the same way it came in. I checked the timestamp against my memories. At 4 in the morning, I'd been asleep in my bed, but the camera showed me entering my own apartment while I was already inside it. I called the police, showed them the footage. They took a report, but I could tell they didn't know what to make of it. One officer suggested it might be a prank, someone who looked like me playing a joke. But he couldn't explain how they got a key, or why they'd have clothes identical to mine. The incidents continued. People kept approaching me about interactions I'd never had. My credit card showed charges at places I'd never been. My work attendance log showed me arriving and leaving at times that didn't match my memory. I started documenting everything, writing down where I was and what I was doing at all times, taking photos of myself with timestamps, anything to prove where I'd been and what I'd done. A month after the coffee shop incident, I was contacted by police in a different precinct. They wanted to question me about a car accident. Someone had rear-ended another vehicle and fled the scene. Multiple witnesses identified the driver. They gave the police my license plate number. I had an alibi for that time. I'd been at work, with colleagues who could verify it. The police seemed relieved. One detective mentioned this wasn't the first strange report they'd gotten about me. There'd been other incidents. A noise complaint at my apartment building when I wasn't home. A shoplifting accusation at a store I'd never entered. The detective asked if I had a twin sibling. I didn't. He asked if I knew anyone who might be deliberately trying to impersonate me. I couldn't think of anyone, but I knew what was happening. Something that looked exactly like me was moving through my life, using my face, my mannerisms, my identity, living a parallel existence that kept intersecting with mine. I moved to a different city 2 months later, changed my phone number, tried to start fresh. For a while, things were quiet. No strange encounters, no accusations about things I didn't do. Then last week I was walking downtown in my new city. I passed a store window and saw my reflection. Except the reflection kept walking after I stopped. I watched it continue down the sidewalk for a few steps before it faded and disappeared. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it wants. But it's still out there, wearing my face, living fragments of a life that mirrors mine. And sometimes, I see it watching me from reflections or from across the street, just standing there, smiling, like it knows something I don't. My brother died in a climbing accident in Colorado in November 2022. He fell during a solo climb, wasn't found until the next day. The funeral was small, family only. We buried him on a grey Thursday that matched the mood perfectly. I was close with my brother. We talked almost every day, usually video calls since he lived 2 states away. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to delete our chat history. Scrolling through old messages and call logs was painful but comforting somehow. 3 weeks after the funeral, my phone rang at 11 at night. A video call from my brother. I stared at the screen. His name, his contact photo, everything was there. The phone kept ringing. My hands were shaking. I knew this was impossible. My brother was dead. I'd seen his body at the funeral home. I'd watched them lower his casket into the ground. But the phone kept ringing. I answered it. The screen was black for a few seconds. Then his face appeared. My brother, looking exactly as he had the last time we talked. Same beard, same smile, same everything. He was in what looked like his apartment, the one he'd lived in before the accident. He said my name, asked how I was doing. His voice was exactly right. The cadence, the slight rasp, the way he emphasized certain words, all perfect. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the screen. This couldn't be real. But there he was, looking at me through the camera, waiting for me to respond. Finally, I managed to ask who this was, what kind of sick joke this was supposed to be. He looked confused. He said it was him. What was wrong with me? He asked if I was okay. I seemed upset. I told him he was dead. He died climbing. I went to his funeral. His expression changed. He looked concerned. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. He was fine. He was right here. He mentioned he hadn't heard from me in a while and was worried. That's why he called. The video quality was slightly off. Little digital artifact around his face, like the connection was unstable, but everything else seemed real. The way he moved, the way he talked, even small gestures that were uniquely his. I asked him questions only my brother would know. Details from our childhood, nicknames, inside jokes. He answered everything correctly, perfectly, but he was dead. I knew he was dead. I told him I needed to go and ended the call. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what just happened. Maybe it was a recording somehow, something pre-programmed. Maybe I was losing my mind. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother. It said he was worried about me and to please call him back. I blocked the number. I couldn't deal with this, whatever it was. The next day, I told my sister what happened. She looked at me with pity and concern. She gently suggested, maybe I was having trouble processing the grief. Maybe I'd dreamed the call or imagined it. I showed her the call log on my phone, the incoming video call from his number, lasting 4 minutes. She went pale. She said it must be someone hacking his account somehow, using his identity. We needed to report it. We contacted the phone company. They confirmed the call came from his number. His account was still active. They'd never received notice to cancel it. As far as their system was concerned, my brother was still using his phone. They helped us cancel the account. That should have been the end of it. 3 days later, my sister called me in a panic. She'd gotten a video call from him. She'd answered without thinking. He'd asked why we were canceling his phone account, why we were acting like he didn't exist. She'd asked him where he was. He described his apartment in detail, said he'd been trying to reach us, but we weren't responding. He sounded hurt that we were ignoring him. My sister asked him about the climbing accident. He said he didn't know what she meant. He hadn't gone climbing recently. He'd been busy with work. She ended the call and immediately called me. We decided to go to his apartment together. We still had his spare key. If someone was there, we'd confront them. If the apartment was empty like it should be, we'd at least have some answers. We drove to his city that afternoon. The 3-hour drive felt endless. We barely spoke. What was there to say? Our dead brother was making video calls. His apartment building looked the same as always. We took the elevator to the 4th floor, walked down the familiar hallway to his door. His welcome mat was still there. His number still on the door. I put the key in the lock. It turned. We pushed the door open. The apartment was furnished and lived in, not empty like it should have been. His furniture was there. His things were there. Dishes in the sink, a jacket on the back of a chair, mail on the counter with recent dates. We stood in the doorway, frozen. The apartment should have been cleaned out. After he died, my mother had arranged for his lease to be terminated and his belongings to be put in storage. But here, everything was, like he still lived here. My sister called out his name. No response. We walked through the apartment slowly. The bedroom looked slept in. The bathroom had toiletries, a damp towel hanging up. Someone was clearly living here. On his desk, I found his laptop. It was closed, but when I opened it, the screen came to life. No password needed. I saw his desktop, his files, everything exactly as I remembered from when he'd shown me things before. There were recent files dated after his death. Photos, documents, browser history from the last few days. My sister was looking at his phone on the nightstand. The phone that should have been with him during the accident, that should have been found with his body. But here it was, plugged in and charging. She picked it up. The lock screen showed notifications, recent texts, missed calls, app alerts, all timestamped from the past few weeks. I heard a sound from the hallway. We both turned toward the door. Footsteps approaching, a key in the lock. The door opened. My brother walked in carrying grocery bags. He saw us and smiled, asked what we were doing here. This was a nice surprise. We just stared at him. He set the groceries on the counter and walked over, asking again why we were in his apartment. He seemed genuinely happy to see us, completely unaware of anything being wrong. My sister asked him point blank what day it was. He told us the date, asked why we were asking weird questions. He said we'd been acting strange lately, not answering his calls, now showing up unannounced. I asked him about Colorado, about the climbing trip. He looked confused and said he didn't know what I was talking about. He hadn't been to Colorado in over a year. My sister started crying. She told him he died. He fell while climbing. We buried him 3 weeks ago. His expression shifted. Something in his eyes changed. For just a moment, he looked wrong. His smile was too wide, his eyes too focused. Then it passed, and he looked normal again, concerned and confused. He said we needed to sit down, that maybe we should talk to someone. He was clearly alive. Whatever we thought happened, we were mistaken. But the way he said it felt off. The tone was right, but something underneath wasn't. Like he was reading from a script of how my brother would respond. My sister grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. She said we needed to leave, now. My brother tried to stop us, reaching for my sister's arm. When his hand touched her, she gasped and pulled away. She said his hand was cold, too cold. We ran, down the hallway, into the elevator, out to our car. He didn't follow us. When we looked back at the building, we could see a figure in his 4th floor window, standing perfectly still, watching us drive away. We went straight to the cemetery, to the plot where we'd buried him. The grave was undisturbed. The headstone was there with his name and dates, 1994 to 2022. But something was living in his apartment, wearing his face, using his phone, existing in the spaces he used to occupy. My sister and I don't talk about it much. The video calls stopped after that day. His apartment was eventually cleared out by the building management when rent went unpaid. They said it was filled with his belongings, which confused them since they'd been told the tenant was deceased. But sometimes I still get text messages from his number, short ones, just checking in, asking how I'm doing, using phrases my brother would use. I never respond, but the messages keep coming, and every time my phone rings with an unknown number, I'm afraid I'll answer and see his face again. That thing wearing his face, living his life somewhere in the spaces between what's real and what shouldn't be possible. I found an old photograph of myself that I never took. It was in a box of my grandmother's things after she passed away in 2023. Family photos, letters, random keepsakes from her long life. The photo showed me standing in front of a house I'd never seen before. I was wearing clothes I didn't own. My hair was styled differently than I'd ever worn it, but it was definitely me. Same face, same build, everything identical. The photo was dated on the back, July 1986. I wasn't born until 1992. I showed it to my mother. She went pale. She said the photo couldn't be real, must be some kind of mistake with the date. But she kept staring at it like she was seeing something that frightened her. I asked her about the house in the background. She recognized it immediately. It was her childhood home, the one she grew up in. My grandmother had sold it in 1989, 3 years before I was born. My mother told me something she'd never mentioned before. Her older sister, my Aunt Claire, had died in 1986 at age 23, the same age I was now. She died in an accident, and my grandmother had been so devastated she rarely spoke about Claire afterward. I'd known I had an aunt who died young, but I'd never seen photos of her. My grandmother kept them all packed away. My mother pulled out an old photo album from her own collection. She opened it to a page of photos from the 80s. There was a young woman standing in front of the same house from my mysterious photo. My Aunt Claire, who looked exactly like me. Not similar, not family resemblance. Exactly like me. Same face, same features, same everything. If someone put my photo next to hers, you couldn't tell us apart. My mother admitted she'd noticed the resemblance when I was growing up, but convinced herself it was just strong family genes. But looking at the photos side by side, even she couldn't deny it was more than that. I became obsessed with learning about Claire. I went through all of my grandmother's boxes, found dozens of photos of her. In every single one, she could have been me. Same expressions, same mannerisms captured on film. I found her diary, started reading entries from 1986, the year she died. In March of that year, she wrote about seeing someone who looked exactly like her. She'd been downtown and spotted her double across the street. She tried to follow but lost sight of the person in the crowd. She wrote about more sightings over the following months, seeing herself in places she hadn't been. People approaching her about conversations she didn't remember having. It was like reading my own experiences from the coffee shop, but written decades before I was born. Her final entry was from July 10th, 1986. She wrote that she'd finally seen her double up close. They'd made eye contact. She wrote that the other version of herself had smiled at her, and something about that smile had filled her with absolute terror. The entry ended with her writing that she needed to figure out what was happening before it was too late. She died 3 days later. The official report said she fell down the stairs in my grandmother's house, broke her neck. But reading that diary entry, I wondered if something else had happened. I started having the same experiences Claire wrote about, seeing myself in reflections that moved independently. People insisting they'd seen me places I'd never been. Last week I was walking home and saw myself standing at the end of my street, just standing there under a streetlight, watching me approach. Same clothes I was wearing, same everything. I stopped walking. We stood there looking at each other for maybe 10 seconds. Then it smiled. The same smile Claire had written about in her diary. A smile that was mine but wrong somehow. I turned and ran the other direction. When I looked back, it was gone. I don't know if it's a doppelganger or something else. Something that wears the faces of certain people in my family. Something that appears generation after generation. Claire saw it in 1986. She died 3 days after writing about it. Now I'm seeing it in 2023. I'm the same age she was when she died. I've been documenting everything, just like she did, writing it down so someone will understand if something happens to me. So they'll know it wasn't just an accident if I fall down the stairs or walk into traffic or whatever way it decides to happen. Because I think that's what it does. It replaces you, takes over your life. And everyone who knew you just accepts this new version without question because it looks exactly like you. I found one more thing in my grandmother's boxes. A photo of her own mother, my great-grandmother, from the 1950 seconds. She looked exactly like my grandmother, and exactly like Claire, and exactly like me. This thing has been following my family for generations, wearing our faces, living our lives, and I don't know how to stop it. 2 days ago, I saw it again. Standing outside my apartment building at 3 in the morning, I watched from my window as it looked up at me. Then it waved. Tomorrow, I'm going to stay with my mother. I'm bringing Claire's diary and all the photos. Maybe together we can figure out what this thing is and how to stop it. But I keep thinking about that final photo I found. The one dated 1986, showing me in front of a house I'd never visited. Except it wasn't me in the photo. It was Claire. Or maybe it was the thing that wears our faces. Either way, it's been here longer than any of us, and I'm afraid it's not done yet.